How do social networks affect sleep? Unfortunately, progress has not only advantages but also disadvantages. That huge wave of information that crashes over us, it certainly stimulates our brain. It leads to a host of problems, particularly with sleep disruption. Why exactly do I have to deal with people who are in information neurosis, who excessively consume information, who are worried about this? And social networks make a significant contribution to this problem. And today I will tell you what the consequences will be, sometimes very unpleasant, if you have an overuse of social networks and the excessive consumption of information from these social networks. Watch this video to the end, and I will give you very simple and effective tips on how to limit the excess of information, eliminate information neurosis, and improve the quality of your sleep. Let's, first of all, figure out what social networks are from the point of view of information. This is people's communication on such a horizontal level. Actually, I may digress a bit. There is such a theory by Rachel Botsman. By the way, this is one of the 10 business theories that, according to The Economist magazine, will influence such a business landscape. Our trust in institutions, the government, ministries, medical centers, and some organizations, so to speak, is falling very quickly. But trust in strangers is growing very quickly. Rachel Botsman asks, what exactly is a stranger? It's anyone we've met on social media. You practically don't know him. Well, you saw some information about him and you believe him. You're already communicating. And this leads not only to the consumption of information, but also to serious enough emotions. And emotions in turn, the excess of these emotions can cause a stressful condition. Moreover, there are studies that show that on the one hand, if you watch some negative information, it annoys you, it excites you, naturally, it somehow interferes with your life and sleep. But on the other hand, if you watch that someone is doing very well, like on our social networks, here we are on vacation, here are our remarkable, well-groomed children, here is a husband who earns a lot of money, here is just a beautiful life. And you turn around, look at your life, but it does not match this visual picture. And, by the way, especially among adolescents, there is such a dissonance between what a person sees in real life and what he sees from these strangers whom he believes that everything is so cool with them. Well, there is a known expression that there is no greater happiness than the misfortune of others. Conversely, if someone else's life seems good and yours doesn't, extra stress arises. You might think, why is my life so sad and poor, and why can't I live like that other person? Although I want to say, well, for a long time in some service, I consult quite a lot of people there in business, art, and these bloggers think they lead a simple life. Oh, you have no idea. It's hard work. And it's, like in the movies, it's one thing on the set of a TV show and another thing behind the scenes. It's a hard everyday work. Let me assure you, it's more than just relaxation, yachts, beautiful children, and the like. But a man doesn't understand this. It annoys him, it agitates him, and I say, in the end, this leads to anxious and depressive states. There's this interesting study that showed they took a group of people with anxiety and depression who had been using, every day they sat on social networks. They divided them into two groups, and one group continued to use social networks, while the other group completely excluded them. For a week. After a week, this group, which excluded the use of social networks, significantly reduced the level of anxiety and depression. Just a week. Even our antidepressants start working after a month. And imagine you excluded this information for a week and start living much better. I also wanted to just remind about so-called breaks. Not fools came up with breaks or recesses in schools. What did children do before the era of smartphones when we had recesses? They played, ran, and communicated. What did people do during lunch breaks when they were working or during any 5-minute production break? They charged their devices and had lunch either when starting or ending their workday. What were they doing? At most, they were reading a book or just resting. What's happening now? The person is constantly on their smartphone. There's a job that shows that if you take an average office worker and they pick up their smartphone during a break to watch some news, read or browse social media, the level of stress will not decrease at best, and at worst, it will increase. And it turns out that now we are never in a relaxed state throughout the day. Either we are working or we are looking at social media, which excites us even more. And then we wonder why a person has stress. why a person has insomnia, why a person's life is so stressful. In this sense, I would say both the smartphone and social media are some kind of information evil to some extent. Well, probably on the other hand, social media apologists would say, how can it be? We didn't feel like people at all without them, and now we are connected to the whole world. But here, I want to bring up another analogy. I once saw a caricature. There are two tribesmen and two missionaries come to them with a computer. They say, we brought you a window to the world, and in a month we will come with antidepressants. Here, so to speak, an unmeasured dosage of medicine can always be turned into poison. On the one hand, of course, information is needed, but on the other hand, an overdose of this information can also be harmful. It particularly causes stress and insomnia. And I want to say that I recently wrote a book, it's called Stress and Insomnia, and how to break out of the vicious circle. There are specifically 12 steps that you do to eliminate stress, improve sleep, and consequently improve the quality of life. Actually, when we used to watch TV, it was some kind of passive perception, but there is some action going on there, but we are not the director. Like with a dream. There is just a dream where we act as an artist, but someone else is the director. And there is lucid dreaming when we act and somehow change the scenario. If we just watch TV, we passively perceive the action. Yes, we may be emotionally invested, but we still take no action. But social networks, search engines, it's every click of a finger, it's making a decision. And we'll look here, and we'll look at this, and we'll go there. Choosing between 2, 3, a large number of options, it puts more strain on the brain, activates it more. Moreover, the smartphone gives off a blue spectrum. When you look at the screen, the light is perceived as sunlight. If there is a blue spectrum, among other things, modern smartphones have a function to change the brightness of the screen. And not only does it become darker, it also becomes more reddish. That is, it removes this blue spectrum to reduce eye strain and reduce the suppression of melatonin production before sleep. For instance, the function is programmed to activate at 10 p.m. But if you imagine again, you are looking at social networks, the brain is constantly making decisions, and you forgot to turn on this function, and the brain perceives it as sunlight, and it's day. The brain is actively functioning. And you can watch for an hour, 2, 3, tap on your smartphone, and you won't want to sleep. And only when it's already 3 a.m. and your smartphone slips out of your hand, you'll doze off and fall asleep, but you won't be able to wake up later. And because you didn't get enough sleep in the morning accordingly, you'll be shattered, exhausted, and just not yourself. And lack of sleep further increases the impact of stress on the body. This creates a vicious cycle resulting in exhaustion, anxiety, and insomnia. It all starts with information overload from news feeds, social networks, and interactions with the outside world.
Roman, so if I understand correctly, I can just switch modes and calmly watch before sleep? No.
Of course, I like it when you know how, but you need to lose weight. Can I still eat fewer donuts instead of donuts with a lot of cream? Well, more often. No, it's important here to limit the use of gadgets as much as possible 2 hours before sleep. That is, we need our brain to calm down. In general, to transition from active wakefulness to passive and to sleep, the average brain needs approximately 2 hours. Well, evolutionarily, it's set up this way. As it started to get dark, life calmed down. Man gradually calmed down too, moved into a cave where it's dark, safe, and so on and so forth, and fell asleep. And we want, therefore, without 15, 12, they're actively chat, solve financial issues with someone, argue, and at 12 already fall asleep. It doesn't happen, or you need to get really tired, but by the middle of the night, but then you won't wake up in the morning. So in general, try to limit this before sleep, this informational impact, communication with smartphones. This significantly improves the quality of sleep. In general, when I recommend people to limit communication with a smartphone, social networks for 2 hours before sleep, it's just some kind of indescribable horror sometimes in people's eyes. Particularly among the younger audience. No, how so? Life will stop. I'm just amazed. I still quote the era when there were no mobile phones. Somehow, I handled the situation. I read books, watch television. Well, again, read books. It's best to read a paper book, yes, any, I don't know, novels or something educational, not too intense, that stimulates the nervous system. Look, at the end of the day, television, but not political news, something like Animal Planet, National Geographic, World Museum, some educational content or relaxing content that allows the brain to gradually calm down and sleep better. Well, sometimes, my patients ask me, doctor, you give us all these useful tips, but do you follow them yourself? Oddly enough, I attempt to track them. For the past few weeks, I've been reading a book before bed. It's called Communication Skills with Patients. Well, it's a very interesting thing that to some extent tells doctors how to communicate with patients. Well, yes, it's some kind of educational material, but it doesn't really excite me that much. Well, some information, but it's quite calm. Next, I have another specificity. I am an insomniac, and I often have some questions from my staff before sleep, and I usually go to bed late at night. Indeed, I start my day at 9 a.m., attending to my patients until they leave. I set up their devices and remain available for calls. But what else I do? I sometimes swim from 11 to 12 at night, let's say a couple, and sometimes 3 times a week. But this can also be called moderate physical activity, not very fast swimming. I finish at 12 at night, and then I have an hour to calm down, get home, and go to bed at 1 o'clock at night. That is, in general, a small, moderate physical load in the form of such arbitrary swimming. Even a walk before sleep for an hour before sleep is quite a good activity, which is moderate, which allows you to calm down later and fall asleep easier. That is, for the most part, I try to follow my own advice, no matter how strange it sounds. If possible, share in the comments what you do 2 hours before sleep. Or maybe you have some questions about what to modify to sleep better. I will try to write down some of my thoughts on this matter as well. One small piece of advice. I recommend it to my patients, but you can do it yourself. There is so-called screen time on the phone. When you use a smartphone, it tracks all this, what you use, which apps, and how much the screen is on in general. I always ask, how much do you work with a person's phone? Well, these are really some business calls and so on and so forth. Someone speaks for an hour. I respond, all right, but consider the screen time. We observe there are 4 hours, 5 hours. I say, what about the rest? And the rest, he says, well, how so? To surf, to look at social networks. After all, if you have any problems with stress, with anxiety, with depression, with insomnia, at least have your social media interaction. You will already see that you will significantly feel better about yourself. And if you want to normalize the situation, limit your social media usage to an hour. I, of course, understand that for someone this is a cry in the wilderness, but the person who really starts to suffer from this and then limits it. Remember, I've been saying for a week now, if you exclude social networks, a person feels much better. So try to also reduce the time you spend on social networks, and you will see that you will start to feel much better.